Today what I want to do is I want to go through some defences of the Fatima apparitions. Now I don't really need to do this because the Catholic Church has already approved the apparitions. They already looked into it thoroughly enough. It's been approved, it's been deemed worthy of belief, and I don't really need to make any defences. And to be honest, even when the Catholic Church has approved it, you still don't need to believe a private revelation. It's a private thing that happens to somebody. Somebody has a vision, a seeing, somebody sees Mary or sees Jesus. You don't have to believe that, even when the church approves it. But for those of us who do, there'll be people that try to attack that. And even though the church has already thoroughly looked into it, I want to go through some possible attacks that a skeptic might make, and then talk about why I think those attacks are ludicrous. So the first one you could make is that the children are crazy. Okay, they thought they saw Mary and that she said these things to them every month, but they're actually crazy. Now the problem with that is that all three of the children would have had to be seeing the same thing. It doesn't happen that you have three different people who are crazy and they all see the same thing when they're crazy, and they all hear the same thing said to them, or at least two of the children in this case heard what was being said to them. And then Francisco, he was just told what happened afterwards, but he still saw Mary. So they all saw Mary, two of them heard what she said, and one of them was able to speak to her. As well as that, you go into the messages themselves and you realize that it's very far-fetched to think that the children will be able to make up such messages that they were told, particularly if you look into the secrets and you look into that second secret about the consecration of Russia, otherwise Russia's going to spread her errors throughout the world. Very elaborate stuff for children of that age to be able to think that they heard because they're crazy. Now the second thing is that they just made it up. That they said they saw Mary and this is what was said to them, but they didn't. They were just being mischievous and made it up. Now again, we have the same problem here with the elaborate messages, particularly the second secret again with Russia. It's quite a thing for children of that age to be able to make up. They wouldn't have had any knowledge about anything like this, and so how would they be able to make that up? And the second problem, of course, is that if they did make it up, why on earth would Lucia, who knew that basically she and her two companions made this up, why on earth would she then go into religious life, become a nun for the rest of her life? It wouldn't make much sense. She wouldn't bother doing that if she thought, well, yeah, they were just making this stuff up. Now, the third thing you can do is you can basically not go for the seers. You can go for the church. And you can say, well, the church has put together this elaborate story and it's used these children in order to make up this story. But we have some problems with that too. The first problem is that Lucia herself would have had something to say for this, you would think. If she went into religious life, became a nun, she would say, hold on a second, no, she didn't have any of these visions of Mary, what are you talking about? The church isn't being truthful here. And it might actually make her not want to be a nun in the church too, if she realised that the church had just made up this story about her. And you could say that the other two children aren't really there to defend themselves, or they weren't there to defend themselves because they died when they were young. And the families were still there, and so was Lucia's family. And so they would all have something to say about this if the church started making up stories about their children. So here's the kind of thing that somebody would have to put together in order to try to disprove these apparitions. They would have to assume that Jacinta and Francisco died, so they can't defend themselves. Lucia wasn't quite right in the head mentally, so the church convinced her that she saw Mary and that Mary told her these things, and she believed that, and that's why she went into religious life and became a nun. That's how far-fetched your story would have to be if you were going to try and attack this apparition. And also, the family of Lucia would have to have said nothing at all to this. Another story you could try and say, if you were going to really go for conspiracy theories, is that the Lucia that we thought we saw for all these years wasn't Lucia, it was somebody else. They replaced her with another lady, and that lady who was the nun was basically going along with this whole story that she saw all these things. Once again, the problem there is the family. Lucia has a family. They would have said something. They would have said, hold on a second, this isn't our daughter, what are you doing, It seems like you've got to have a much, much greater, strange and obscure conspiratorial imagination to try and think these apparitions didn't happen. Anyway, that's my brief explanation. It probably isn't great, but I just wanted to go through some of the attacks by skeptics and some of the reasons why these attacks don't make a lot of sense.